Coutts. Coutts is a point of entry between Alberta and Montana. And we did a church service in Milk River. The roads were open when we came in. The roads were open when we left. The only blockage was done by the RCMP officers. They filmed me. They took pictures. I went to talk to them, and I asked them, would you be able to open the barricade for us? We want to go to Coutts. They did that, believe it or not. It was RCMP that led us, opened the barricade, and allowed us to go to Coutts. Later, we learned that they were parked outside my home for a week, monitoring me coming in and going out. I was interrogated by RCMP for hours, then taken to prison, stripped naked, taken to solitary confinement. The next day, I was placed in metal cages, believe it or not. And then I was taken from one solitary cell with a bed to another one on concrete, no washroom and no water. And that was going on for 45 days. And then in the end, I end up, believe it or not, after 3 weeks, they denied my access to my lawyers. I end up in MaxPod in Edmonton, which is a place for the most dangerous terrorists.
Welcome back to another Stand on Guard episode. What you're about to hear is an interview with Pastor Artur Pawlowski and his son Nathaniel Pawlowski. What he's about to tell you about what the state did to him for daring to hold church services for the Freedom Convoy during a pandemic is absolutely shocking. You're going to cheer him because he stands up for religious liberty. He stands up for all of our freedom. You're going to be shocked at what the government did to him as he tells us some things I don't think he's told any other media outlet. So please stand by for one fantastic interview.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need to resolve to resist.
Well, hello again. This is David Krayden reporting for the Post Millennial. And I'm very happy to have my guests this afternoon, Pastor Artur Pawlowski and his son, Nathaniel Pawlowski, both of whom should not be unknown to our audience because the pastor has been fighting government repression since the height or depth of the COVID-19 mandates, and he continues to do that. And we're going to be talking to him about that. But his son, Nathaniel, recently went to the European Union Parliament to address it. And he spared no words for this government in Canada. So I just, if I could start with you, Nathaniel, who invited you to address the European Union?
Yeah, well, my dad was actually invited. There was a citizens initiative that was going on, put on by several members of European Parliament, and also a bunch of citizens, of course, and other politicians, local politicians, members of Parliament from the UK and all around Europe. And they invited my dad to come speak, but because of his present condition with the house arrest, the curfew, he wasn't allowed to go, so I went in his stead.
And so the invitation came from the Parliament in general, or one of the members?
A few members and an organizer of the Citizens Initiative invited my dad and myself.
And so you made quite a splash when you were there describing the Trudeau government. I wonder if you could recapitulate how you described Justin Trudeau and this Liberal government.
Yeah, well, the Citizens Initiative was actually regarding the World Health Organization and the WEF and other United Nations affiliated groups sort of infiltrating sovereign nations in Europe. And it was all about how European nations do not want the WHO interfering with their sovereign countries. And a part of that was some people were speaking. And of course, my dad was invited to speak to kind of the consequences of having governments implement very totalitarian trending restrictions, mandates in the name of health. Of course, what they're doing is they're stripping rights and freedoms in the name of your benefit, of your safety and your health. But of course, it's a power grab. So what I spoke to was the consequences. My dad is facing up to 10 years in prison for a thought crime, for speaking, for inciting mischief. That's a thought crime. He said words that the government doesn't agree with. And because of that, of course, all of this was regarding the COVID stuff, the COVID mandates, the truckers, and he just said words that the government doesn't agree with. So we don't have free speech in Canada. We don't have freedom of religion. And I was just explaining to the parliament that we don't have our rights and freedoms in Canada anymore. They were taken away in the name of health, in the name of our safety and benefit, and we were stripped of our rights. So I explained to the parliament that what is happening is tyranny. We're experiencing tyranny. Trudeau is a tyrant. The local governments are no better. They're also tyrannical. And because of course, the provincial governments are actually potentially even more tyrannical than Trudeau, because they're the ones that imposed most of the mandates and restrictions that took away our rights and freedoms. So I was explaining to the parliament, these politicians are tyrannical. Canada has fallen. Trudeau is a Caligula.
We are all lost as Canadians. If a pastor goes to prison, what can they do to the rest of us? For giving a sermon in Canada, it is no better. They are no better than the tyrants of old. So please, I ask you for help and to pressure Canada on this matter and to help us deal with our oppressors who act like modern day Caligulas. Trudeau is a modern day Caligula.
He's a mad emperor. He's lost his mind. And we're in a very bad position as Canadians.
And now, Pastor, for those of you for those listening and watching who don't remember, what exactly did you say to get the state that angry at you during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, there's a combination of things. Like, first of all, you have to understand that I am a Polish immigrant that grew up behind the Iron Curtain under the boots of the Soviets. So my accent, me growing up and seeing firsthand a totalitarian regime, I did not just read a book. I lived through horrors of regime, a dictatorship. I think that's a number one thing. A man like me, a person that knows what he's talking about because he lived through that period of time in his own country, it's a danger. Those witnesses are not welcomed. They prefer to own the mainstream propaganda machinery without other voices. And that's exactly what I have seen when I was growing up. Second, I am a Polish immigrant, and we are peculiar people, put it this way. We are like Americans, so much like Americans. We actually value our freedoms. The nation was formed and stood against tyrants all around us because we were willing to fight for what rightfully belongs to us, for the inheritance that we want to pass and give it to our children, just like Americans. Freedom, in other words, what I want to say is deep within our bloodstream. It's in our DNA. We love freedom. Poland was the second country on earth that implemented constitution right after the United States of America. So freedom to us is not a brainer. It's something that every human being must have, and it does not come from the state. Freedom comes from God himself. So I think that's a second thing. And a third one is that I dared to publicly oppose them and expose them. I was not hiding. I was not whispering. I was not calling them Mr. Officer, Mr. Nice. I was not your typical Canadian that was apologizing for apologizing. I was a man a clergyman that stood, a father, against those wolves or hyenas. And I did it in a very public and loud vocal way. And that embarrassed them. My video of Get Out, of course, after the police, bylaw services, and Alberta Health Services came breaking the Criminal Code of Canada, section 176, 1, 2, and 3. They were the lawbreakers. When I kicked them out, when that video Get Out Nazis reached over 1 billion views, it was the #1 viewed video during that Passover weekend in 2021, they came back with vengeance. And that's the only way I can describe this right now. This is a personal vengeance by a very evil, weak, totalitarian regime that is just out to get us because we have embarrassed them. And I think what's more important, we have showed the whole world who those people really are. We exposed them. They love to do their corruption in the shadows, under the blanket of no one sees it, no one hears it. What I did, I showed the whole world, look, those are the real villains. This is what they're doing, and I will have nothing of it. So they came back with a vengeance. They came back with the crooked judges' orders, and I kept fighting. They kept coming. Everything kind of escalated when the SWAT team started to show up, the anti-terrorists. Then ultimately we got arrested with my brother David, then arrested again, rearrested again. During that time, I got over 40 COVID tickets, 5 arrests, and I spent multiple times. I spent time in jail, and of course, the last one for my most horrible crime, because I have become Canada's pastor, as they call me, or freedom pastor. The truck convoy asked me to conduct series of church services, which I gladly did, and I'm actually super proud of that moment in my life that I was able to participate with the most beautiful Canadians on earth, people, a family, loving, all colors, all creeds, all backgrounds coming together and singing with each other, feeding each other, hugging each other, loving each other, crying with each other. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen on this soil in our beloved Canada. So I did a series of church services in Calgary. Then we got invited to Milk River. Actually, my son Nathaniel and our worship leader, Larry, we all went to Milk River and Coots. Coots is a point of entry between Alberta and Montana. And we did a church service in Milk River. The roads were open when we came in. The roads were open when we left. The only blockage was done by the RCMP officers. They filmed me. They took pictures. I went to talk to them, and I asked them, would you be able to open the barricade for us? We want to go to Coots. They did that, believe it or not. It was RCMP that let us open the barricade and allowed us to go to Coots. In a private setting, on a private property, in a restaurant, I delivered another church service. We had Lord's Supper, the Holy Communion. We were singing hymns together, national anthem. We prayed for people, and I did 19 minutes speech. And it was that speech that the Crown prosecutor said it cost Canadian economy over $400 million worth of damages. He said that my speech was like a Rwanda genocide. He compared my speech. What did I say during my speech? I told Canadians to hold the line. I told them to stand by God and state-given rights. I told them to do it for their children. And I told them 3 times to do it peacefully. No guns, no swords. This is a peaceful uprising. We can paralyze their system by simply refusal to work, cooperate with them, non-compliance, the solidarity movement style, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. civil rights movement style, when the people come together and simply say to their tyrants, not an inch, no more. That's what I said to Canadians. It must be a very powerful speech, because a few days later, anti-terrorists came, RCMP, detectives, uniformed Calgary police, undercover.
I am Artur Pawlowski, born behind the Iron Curtain in Poland, crushed by the iron fist of oppression.
The armed forces now rule in Poland with martial law and the threat of execution for those who break it.
Do wojskowej diktatury.
The horrors inflicted by unchecked despotism have burned their mark into my memory. The December of 1981, when martial law turned our cities into shadows. The biting winters when the quest for bread met with empty shelves. The silenced voices of cutting forest. These memories led me to vow never again.
Good, the bad, and the ugly. The story of totalitarian regimes or the story of any dictatorships is a sad story because in the end, everyone suffers, including the villains. The brown shirts of Adolf Hitler, if you will, or those that told so many times, I'm just following orders, they are going to be hurting. Their children and their grandchildren are going to be hurting. In the end of the day, is hell for everyone. And that's communism, that's socialism, that's what fascism is all about, to make everyone and everything miserable. And that's what I was trying to avoid. That's why I was very vocal. I'm still very vocal because I still believe that we can turn this around if enough people would simply say no. You got to remember, historically speaking, the moment freedom of religion goes, all the other rights follow. That's history. That's not me preaching. That's history. They always attack first freedom of religion. They hate competition, if you will. They think of themselves as elites. We are the pharaohs of today. Whatever we say, it must become a law. And then here you've got clergymen, you got Christians, you've got other faiths, and it's a competition. And they have to destroy it in order to go after all the other rights and freedoms. It's a playbook. I mean, they're not doing something new. If you don't believe me, Google it up, how Adolf Hitler came to power. It's a straightforward playbook.
Now, people are objecting, I shouldn't say people, but the government, or I think it's the federal government here, is objecting to you using the solidarity poster. You've been told not to use that?
Yeah, well, what happened for 8 months, they were coming to me, the government, were coming to me with bribery. I was offered a government job, I was offered money, I was offered amnesty, I was offered a guaranteed seat at the legislature if I crossed the floor and abandoned my party and joined their party. So that's what was going on for about 8 months. Now they've changed the tactics. Of course, by now, everyone realizes that I'm not for sale. I'm a Christian man. I have been bought with the precious blood of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I'm not for sale. You can't buy me. I don't care. You can put $1 billion on the table. I refuse to be your slave. I have been born to be free, and I want to die free, man, not your slave for $1 billion or millions of dollars. So by now they are realized, okay, there's nothing we can offer this guy. He's not going to sell his faith and the people. So now they changed the tactics. It's blackmail. I have been blackmailed for about a month now. They told me if I don't give them $150,000, if I don't withdraw myself from political realm, if I don't stop talking about politicians. So that's what we are experiencing right now. And if you know, I don't know if you remember the story, when I was in prison, 5 different inmates already testified when I was still there that the guards were giving them incentives to beat me up or to murder me when I was there. So those people are serious. Bribery didn't work. Blackmail didn't work. So I don't know what they're cooking for me, but that's why I decided with my family to be as loud as I can. That's why Nathaniel went to European Union to make that presentation, because now the only way I know how to fight them is to bring the light into this great corruption, into this darkness, for the whole world to know what's happening in our beloved country.
Well, Nathaniel, you had to go to the European Union Parliament to get people to stand on their feet and cheer, and to see how your father is being treated, not just unjustly, but ruthlessly. Did you get any feedback, any pushback from the Conservative Party of Canada, from Pierre Poilievre? Is there anyone there supporting you?
No, the Conservative Party doesn't support anything we're doing because they're only, at least from what I've seen, they're only conservative in name. They're barely fiscally conservative. They're not socially conservative, that's for
No.
sure. So they're basically as liberal as the liberals. So no, you saw how Pierre Poilievre threw Christine Anderson under the bus when she was in Canada. Just completely tossed her under the bus, treated her like absolute garbage. There is no evidence that she has any of the views that he claimed. I've personally met her several times. A wonderful person. She stands for freedom. She stands for liberty. And she was at the Citizens Initiative. She was in the crowd when I was speaking. We spoke on the same stage, and other members of European Parliament, and they are showing immense support for the cause, for my family. They stood up, gave a standing ovation as well as everybody else. They thanked me. They told me that they completely support what we're doing and they stand for us. So internationally, we have many politicians that stand for us. In the United States, there are many congressmen that have stood up for us, senators, U.S. senators, state senators, local representatives from state legislatures. So globally, many politicians stand for us. They understand what the fight is about. And locally, no, there aren't any politicians that stand for us.
That doesn't surprise me because I have been hammering Poilievre and the Conservatives for their complete refusal to oppose gender ideology. They've said nothing about the Gay Pride Month in the schools, where children are forced to see and to learn the LGBTQ agenda, ideology. They've said nothing about this. They're not opposed to it. They have said nothing about drag queen story hours. They've said nothing about people who have been arrested for opposing that. So I'm not surprised to hear that. But what does surprise me, and perhaps it shouldn't, is that Muslim mothers and fathers are out in thousands opposing Justin Trudeau's agenda. And they're afraid to put those people into prison. They're afraid to charge them, but they're not afraid to charge Christians. And I was at an event on July 1st. I'm an evangelical Christian myself, and I'm appalled at how evangelical Christians, in many senses, refuse to push back against government repression, and even will come to the point of saying we're so happy we live in a country like Canada where we have freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And of course, I don't think we have either of those anymore. And either of you, I mean, how do you feel when Christians get up and try to make this liberal government sound like it stands for freedom when people like you are being threatened with 10 years?
Well, Christians have freedom of religion and freedom of speech. Everyone has freedom of religion and freedom of speech as long as you don't do something that the government disagrees with. So if you talk the party line, then you're completely fine. But if you say something that goes against what they believe, against their agenda, against their ideology, against the political line, well, then you're going to be arrested and ticketed, because that's how the freedom of speech and freedom of religion and all rights and freedoms work in Canada. If you stay in your lane, live your life according to what the Canadian government wants, you'll be fine. But if you do something that steps outside of that, well, then you're going to be hammered and ticketed and arrested and put through the entire system. Muslims are a little bit different than Christians. Christians are pathetic. In Canada, especially, we're just lazy, comfortable, apathetic. But Muslims don't really let governments roll over them. They're a little bit more aggressive in their stance. But I disagree with you when you say that they're not coming out after Muslims, because just in Calgary, one Muslim was charged for putting on a protest against the gender stuff. So they're actually coming after them as well. I don't know what the response is going to be from the Muslim community right now. That remains to be seen. But they're coming after everybody now. And that surprises me. That shocked me a little bit, that they're coming after the Muslims now. So that means they feel completely immune. They're not afraid of anyone. The Canadian government believes they're gods. They believe they are the tyrants, and they're immune to everything. They're getting away with everything. Like, just look at the Emergency Act. We had martial law invocated on Canadians, grandmas trampled with horses, peaceful truckers beaten with batons, and they got away with it. So they feel invincible. They're going to come after anyone who disagrees with them now.
And that reminds me that we are, historically speaking, we are in the middle of the 30s in Nazi Germany, where you could see clearly that there is a totalitarian regime that is beating people up, arresting people. But majority of the Germans at that time were not feeling the consequences of a police state or totalitarian regime, as long as you were not opposing Adolf Hitler and his plans. No one would bother you. They didn't care about you. I remember reading in history about the churches, the German churches during the Nazi era. And as long as you put that flag outside, the Nazi flag, no one would bother you. No one cared. As long as you play the game and you're part of the system, you're a good guy. Those types of pastors and Christians were not attacked until the totalitarian regime had an absolute total control. So we're talking about 38, we're talking about 39 and 40, where that's it. It was over. You couldn't say no. I always quite often say that the first victim of Nazi Germany, Nazis and Adolf Hitler regimes were the German people. They were the first victims of that totalitarian regime. Those that opposed, those that stood against it. The Buchenwald, the Dachau were built for the Germans, for those that dared to oppose Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party. Because this evil that we're dealing with, and we have to name it, this is evil. What we see globally, those are evil, wicked people. This evil never stops. It's like a cancer. It has to be cut off. Evil has to be stopped. It will never stop on its own. That's why Hitler and the Nazi Party had to be stopped. There was no other way, because they grew bigger and stronger. And they, for whatever reason, they think they're the elites. You will own nothing. You will be eating crickets and you will be happy. While at the same time, they will own everything. They will be driving and flying private jets and driving SUVs, eating Japanese steaks, and I don't know. They will be unhappy at the time. It's hard to understand their logic, because there is no logic behind it unless you know the game. And what is the end game? The end game is very clear. And listen to this Polish immigrant. The end game is creation of two categories of people: extremely powerful, the elites, and slaves, just like during the time when I was growing up. There were only two categories of people. The middle class didn't exist. It was extremely poor, chasing after the tail, just looking for necessities of life every single day. And then you've got 50,000 communists in the country that were ruling with an iron fist 36 million Polish people, until the 36 millions finally said, that's it, enough. We're not going to serve you anymore. We are not your slaves. And they took it to the streets. So the playbook is the same. But what worked for the villains before can work for us that want to be free today. And that's why the solidarity movement comes in. I said to the Canadian truckers and the farmers, and during the rallies, we used to have 15 to 20,000 people on the streets of Calgary every week. And I said, listen, we got the power. Actually, you are the power. This ends when you say it ends, not where the premier says it ends or prime minister. Who are those uncircumcised Philistines that should defy the armies of the living God? Like, who those people are? The moment Canadians say, no, I'm not going to obey this. So think about this way: 3,000 police officers in the city of Calgary. If just them, out of 1.3 million Calgarians, just 3,000 men and women would say, no, we're not going to enforce illegal mandates. We're not going to break the criminal code of Canada. We swear to uphold the law. And you guys, you politicians, you're breaking the law. We're not going to assist you in this. It would be over for the villains. That's it.
Yeah.
Boom, done. 3,000 people. If they did their job, But you see, we're dealing with selfishness. We're dealing with self-centeredness. We're dealing with a society that had too good for too long, and it's me, I, and myself. I don't care what happens to you as long as my paycheck is coming. When I was challenging the police officers, I told them, what are you doing? Like, seriously, you are Gestapo, you are SS, you're doing exactly what those people in the late 20s and 30s were doing before they started to murder people left and right and build concentration camps. Don't you see it? And you know, the response was, well, I'm just following orders. I'm doing this for my pension. What do you want from me? If I don't do it, I'll be fired. It would be better, man, for you to be fired than to lose your soul, than to lose your humanity.
Yeah, I heard the same thing from police officers here in Ottawa during the Freedom Convoy when they were beating people up, and when they were physically assaulting protesters. Yes, I'm just following orders. And I said, you know, I've heard that said by a lot of other people, and one of them was named Adolf Eichmann.
Yes.
And there were others, many others like him, who said, "I'm just following orders. Thank you." And that's I have no control over this, and of course that's utter nonsense. But,
you know, and that's why, you know, I just want to add this. That's why I use a very strong language. You got to understand, you're not talking to a typical Canadian that grew up in a beautiful environment with a house and two parents, and one was working, another could stay at home and vacationing 3 times a year, driving a nice car. I grew up in a ghetto. I grew up in hell on earth. And I'm telling you, hell has visited you. If you don't fight, if you don't stand up now, you're going to regret for the rest of your life that you didn't, and your children will pay the price of your cowardice. So what I'm simply saying, the use of language, Gestapo, KGB, sociopaths, psychopaths, communists, what I'm saying is I'm trying to shake you off your horse. I want to slap you in the face. Wake up. Don't you see? The villains have already come. They're not approaching. They're within the gates right here. If you don't fend them off, they're going to eat you alive. Wake up.
So what happens if you are in fact sentenced to 10 years? Is there a chance of appeal for you?
Yes, of course. We already have the appeal done. We're just waiting for the sentencing. We cannot do anything until sentencing. So first the judge has to, you know, bring the hammer down, and whatever he thinks I deserve. According to him, I'm a criminal, and I've done a horrible thing by doing a service, a church service to the truckers. So who knows what he's going to do? He may say, well, you're going to prison for 10 years. Well, at the moment he articulates his sentencing, we're going to appeal it right away. The problem with this is I don't know where I am going to be during that process and for how long, if he sends me to prison. But at this time, no one except God, of course, knows what is going to happen. And that's why we're doing this show, because we've decided that instead of being scared, instead of bowing before the blackmail and threats, we've decided to bring light into this situation and perhaps pressure the political realm or the world to focus to see what's happening here. Because be sure of it, I am like a shield between you and the villains. When people like me fall down, when that shield is removed, you're next. You're next. They will come for you next. They will come for everyone, because in a totalitarian regime, no one is allowed to have freedom. Everyone must be enslaved, including the elites. The fascinating part of the story is that in the end of the day, everyone was afraid of Stalin. The closest people, even the family members. He murdered a husband of his daughter. I mean, those are psychopaths. Those are bloody murders. They're demon-possessed, wicked, evil monsters. They're not even human beings anymore. They're monsters. And during that kind of environment, no one is safe. No one is safe. No. Assassinations are happening all the time within the elites circles. So in the end of the day, it's hell for everyone.
Are you fundraising for your future defense? Is there anything we can do to promote that?
Yeah, so we are doing a crowdfunding right now for actually Nathaniel's case. Nathaniel has been charged with harassment because he dared to read the Bible. He was detained and then detained again upon his arrival from Brussels. I think the government didn't like what he had to say, interrogated, searched, and then learned that his passport was flagged and there is a warrant for his arrest. So I had to hire a lawyer. And those types of constitutional lawyers are absolutely crazy expensive. So I retained that lawyer, $10,000 a retainer, and $525 per hour. So if people can help that would be greatly appreciated. And you can donate going to streetchurch.ca, streetchurch.ca, so www.streetchurch.ca, or e-transfer here in Canada, art, A-R-T, at streetchurch.ca. Well, the thing is, one man cannot do this. One family cannot do this. One church cannot do that, cannot fight such a huge entities with unlimited resources. So we need your help, of course.
Well, I will do whatever I can to promote your fundraising and to raise the profile of this injustice. I think this is perhaps the gravest story I've heard all year, and I've heard some bad ones. But to flesh this story out as I have over the last half hour, this is a national tragedy. And it's even more of a national tragedy when you have absolutely no one in the House of Commons who's prepared to stand up and defend you. My friend Maxime Bernier, I think, is the only politician in Canada who has defended you, and unfortunately, Maxime did not win his by-election. You know, I supported Pierre Poilievre in his leadership bid, but I'll be damned if I'm ever going to be in the pocket of the Conservative Party of Canada, because they let us down every time, and they're letting us down again with you, and they're letting freedom down. They're letting everything good about this country down. And the very fact that we would contemplate putting a pastor in jail for 10 years or holding church services is, to me, an indication this country has been turned on its head. And I'm ashamed at times to be a Canadian. I'm ashamed at times to be an evangelical Christian who thinks we have freedom of religion in this country, because it's true, we have freedom of religion as long as we toe the party line. But the Soviet-style churches, the Soviet churches had freedom of religion too, as long as they didn't attack the regime. And the Protestant and Roman Catholic Church, as you've mentioned, Pastor, in Nazi Germany, were fine. Nobody ever tried to shut them down, as long as they did not directly oppose the Nazis.
That's right. And, you know, that's the thing. When you make a deal with the devil will leave you be for a while. But be very careful with that approach, because Stalin nailed it. It's attributed to Stalin. I don't think he actually said that, but applies still. Useful idiots. I have seen it over and over again. They will use you, and then they will spit you out, or they will throw you like a filthy rag. And that's what they did with the police. I don't know if you were watching the public inquiry in Ottawa.
I was there.
Every
day.
I was fascinated how the government threw the police under the bus. And I said to my wife, or someone that was watching this with me, I said, I've told you so. They're going to use those useful idiots, and then they will throw them under the bus. They will blame the police for what happened. They do this every single time. But you know the biggest tragedy in the province of Alberta? We have a so-called conservative government with people that claim, many of them, they claim they're Christians. But do you know that there's still 3,000 people still in a court system subjected to the COVID tyranny as we speak right now? Thousands of Albertans are still fighting what has been done to us under this tyranny in the past few years, and no one within the government is standing up for us publicly. Danielle Smith threw us under the bus, pretending that she can do nothing. She was elected on the promises, backed away from every promise that she made, and we have been lost. We have been left orphans. We have no political party except the one that we just created, the Solidarity Movement of Alberta, Ontario Party with Derek Sloan, and of course the federal two parties that I know that are good, which is the Christian Heritage Party and the People's Party with Maxime Bernier. Other than that, but no ruling party at this moment. Not one ruling party is defending God and state given rights. Not one party is defending the Criminal Code of Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Bill of Rights, or even international human rights. Not even one of them. This is the biggest treachery. If I had the power, if one day I wake up and I'm King Arthur, you know, I would charge them for treason, because that's exactly what they have done to Canadians and to Canada. They have betrayed Canada and Canadians.
Yes. Well, we're going to do whatever we can to get this issue and what's happened to you up there front and center. You probably have more support in the United States than you do in Canada, and we've got to change that. We've got to change that, because what is happening to you should never happen in Canada or any democracy. So this is probably going to end up being two stories, because there's just so much material here. I want to thank you both for talking to me today, and I want to stay in touch, because this is not the end, and it's not the beginning, but I hope it's the beginning of the end of what's happening to you, Pastor. And you know, Canadians, I think, have had enough of woke policies, but it's time they awoke to what's really happening. It's time to wake up that this country's going downhill.
Yeah, it's time. And I want to just finish with this. My family story, it should be a warning to everyone. Look, they have attacked me without mercy for so many years, put me in prison, over 340 citations, over 120 court cases, 16 arrests. But now they're coming after my boy. You see, what did I say about evil, the cancer? It never stops. It has to be cut out. It has to be stopped. They're coming after our children. And it's time for good men in our beloved Canada to rise up, stand up, and simply say, like the Polish people before, during that solidarity movement, enough. Not an inch. Not anymore.
Anything to add, Nathaniel?
No, that's a good note to end it on. Thank you for having us.
Okay, well, thank you for talking to me today, and I will stay in touch. And God bless both of you, and Godspeed to this fight. And I'm with you. I'm always going to be frank and as courageous as I can be in addressing these issues, because politicians in this day and age are largely craven cowards. I know it's a bit of, but they are. They are afraid to say anything that is going to offend anybody except those who don't complain. And it's people like you who don't complain enough. They can tread on your rights. They can tell you that your opinions don't matter. And you'll probably take it. But it's time to fight back. It's time to resolve to resist. And that's what we need to do in this country. And that's what we're going to continue to do in the station. So I want to thank you for listening today. Thank you for watching today. I think we've got the information here that people who watch the nightly news aren't necessarily getting. And that's the point. And that's my goal, is to give you that information. So for Krayden's Right, from Stand on Guard, I'm David Krayden, and I'm just happy to be able to talk to you again this week. And I'll be back again soon with more information. Thanks for watching.